The Jewish Council of Australia is a progressive coalition of Jewish academics, lawyers, writers and teachers formed earlier this year. Sarah Schwartz is the executive officer and joins us now from Melbourne. Sarah Schwartz, welcome. So what do you make of the government creating this position?
Thank you. Look, I would say anti-Semitism is a serious issue and we know that it's rising, but the way in which the government has appointed this particular anti-Semitism envoy shows that it is treating this issue merely as a political issue and not as a racism issue. The treatment of anti-Semitism as distinct from all other forms of racism really undermines the important work that is already being done across racial lines to address all forms of racism. And to single out anti-Semitism when we know that other groups are also experiencing racism, including First Nations people, Palestinian and Muslim communities, it really undermines those wider efforts to fight anti-racism together.
But there is an envoy soon to be appointed to address Islamophobia too. That was part of that announcement today.
Yes, it is concerning, though, that the government has gone ahead with the announcement of the Anti-Semitism Commission envoy alone. And the primary issue here isn't necessarily whether there will be other envoys, but really that it doesn't make sense to single out specific forms of racism. We're not going to have envoys for every single racialized group. We already have a race discrimination commissioner with a mandate to address racism. And what does it say when only Jews are singled out? And so we really do have these concerns that this appointment will pit Jewish communities against other racialized groups and only cause further division.
I guess the government's point is there is heightened incidents of racism within these groups at the moment with the war that's going on.
Absolutely, there is heightened racism against Jewish people. I know that. I've experienced that personally. Other members of the Jewish Council have also experienced that. But what we've seen the Albanese government do today is appoint an anti-Semitism envoy who, instead of having a background in fighting anti-racism and academic credentials to back that up, rather, he's appointed an envoy with a track record in previous roles of lobbying for Israel, of opposing voices that support Palestinian human rights, and painting all Jewish people as supportive of Israel's actions, when we know that, in fact, there are many Jewish people like myself and other people around the country who support Palestinian freedom and human rights. And so there are real concerns that this appointment will be used for political purposes to lobby for Israel, to stifle voices in support of Palestinian human rights, and ultimately in a way that does not make Jewish people more safe.
And so what is wrong with someone who has lobbied for Israel?
Well, the concern here is that this position will be used for political purposes. It's very important that people make a distinction between Jewish identity and support for Israel. There are many Jewish people like myself who are appalled at what Israel is currently doing in Gaza. And to appoint someone who conflates Jewish identity with the state of Israel will risk breeding and fueling anti-Semitism against Jewish people by aligning us all with the state of Israel. And it's really important that anti-Semitism is addressed and that we distinguish between genuine incidents of anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the Israeli government and the Israeli military. And if you conflate the two, as this envoy has done in the past, well, it means that it's very difficult for people to identify real instances of anti-Semitism, and it risks watering down legitimate claims of anti-Semitism, which we know are rising.
But the Executive Council of Australian Juries says Jill Segal, and that's the person you've been referring to who's been appointed today, the council says she is the right person for the job because of what it describes as her moderation.
Well, what I would say is that this particular envoy is the previous president of the Executive Council of Australian Jury, who has been a primary pro-war voice in Australia. They have relied on anti-Palestinian racism to justify Israel's violence against Palestinians, and have been a body that has been lobbying for the silencing of Palestinian voices, including lobbying for the silencing of Jewish voices in support of Palestinian freedom and human rights. So there are real concerns that this particular envoy will not represent all Jewish people or call out important instances of anti-Semitism, but will use this position for political purposes to stifle voices in support of Palestinian human rights.
But yeah, your description of her, I think, or them as pro-war, I think that's based on what she's quoted to have said at a rally in terms of the offensive must continue until Hamas is destroyed. Is that you argue that's a fair enough description of describing saying she's pro-war on the basis of that?
Well, the current, and as Anthony Albanese said today in his press release about the announcement of the envoy, the Australian government is committed to a ceasefire and has been lobbying for a ceasefire. But we don't see an anti-Semitism commissioner that is lobbying for those reasons. And so I think it's incredibly concerning that we have a commissioner being appointed who has lobbied so vociferously for the state of Israel and has not spoken out against Israel's egregious human rights abuses. I think that shows that there is a real risk that this envoy position will be used for political reasons to continue to lobby for Israel and to continue to conflate Jewish identity with the state of Israel, which we know that there are many Jewish people like myself, as I said, who don't support what the state of Israel is doing at the moment.
Yeah, but I might also just point out that the Executive Council of Australian Jewry was just on the channel in the last hour, and he was adamant that it is not necessarily anti-Semitic to criticise the government for doing whatever it's doing. That is not an anti-Semitic thing to do. So, again, do you argue it's fair enough to claim those points that you have?
Look, I think that's great that they've said that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism, but we need to look at the track record of these groups. And their track record, including this anti-Semitism envoy's track record, is of saying that, scarves worn in solidarity with Palestinians, chants calling for freedom and equality for Palestinians, saying that these things make Jewish people feel unsafe, and are instances of anti-Semitism. And so there are clear records of these groups making these claims. And mind you, there are many Jewish people who have been at Palestinian solidarity rallies, who have been making those same chants that these groups claim are anti-Semitic. And so I think we really need to look at the track record of these groups. And the track record of these groups is using claims of anti-Semitism to stifle voices in support of Palestinian freedom and justice. And that is really concerning, because if you do that, if you use anti-Semitism and the language of anti-Semitism in that way, then it means that we can't identify real instances of anti-Semitism, which we know are on the rise. We know that the far right is on the rise. We know that there are neo-Nazis, particularly where I live in Victoria, who are planning, who are making plans and who pose a real threat to Jewish people. And instead, if we just call criticisms of Israel or displays of solidarity with Palestinians or anti-war university students, if we call these things anti-Semitic, well, it really waters down the claim of anti-Semitism entirely.
Okay, Sarah Schwartz, thanks for talking to us from Melbourne.
Thank you.